who want to stand up to the communists in Nicaragua, double the military budget, stop working for arms control, and bankrupt the Russians in the arms race? Do you know any of these belligerents who somehow managed to escape the draft, who chose instead to study divinity or diplomacy, or who came up with a bad knee? Well, if you do, you know a war wimp. It all began with a speech on the Hill by sometime Crossfire host Robert Dryden, but columnist Mark Shields has taken up the cudgels on the other side. Does a man who avoided military service have a right to call names? Bob?
Tom, your introduction is about almost as outrageous as Mark Shields' column. But let me ask you this, Mr. Shields, from the very beginning. Are you and the other so-called tough guy liberal columnists say that somebody who did not serve on garrison duty in the peacetime Army or Marine Corps, as you did, are not qualified to take a position of strength for the United States against communism and against terrorism?
No.
That's what I thought you were saying in your column.
Not at all. Not at all. Do you want to know what I said in my column, or do you want to give your interpretation?
I'll give my interpretation.
Yeah, we're ready for that, Mr. Novak. I'll tell you exactly what
he said.
What I'm saying is, and I said it pretty directly, I thought, but I'll do it in crayons for you. And that is that people who said Vietnam was a great war and who chose not to go in that war are ill-prepared or ill-qualified to suggest that Walter Mondale, who did serve, that George McGovern, who was a decorated hero of World War II, were somehow sellouts, are Neville Chamberlains. And that's the language that's been used by the man in question, Congressman Gingrich, Mr. Weber's colleague, who is not here. And I'd just like to say, there is not any difference between Mondale's disdaining for the Christian minority faction in Lebanon and Neville Chamberlain's willingness to sell out the free Czechs in Czechoslovakia. One more quote, please. Anyone who votes for the Barnes-Hamilton Amendment could wear an I despise America button with great dignity.
Well,
I submit that that is offensive and that Mr. Gingrich has no standing.
It's offensive because you disagree with it, Mr. Shields. Let me just say this, but the idea that you're putting forth that somebody has no standing because they were I'll let you finish. Right. Let me finish.
Okay.
Because they were a student or because they have a physical impairment is McCarthyism, and it is beneath you. It is beneath you.
Congressman Weber had, and I talked to him a year ago on this subject, he had a very severe case of asthma. I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah, but I am suggesting... and I know you have been fair about that, but this whole suggestion now, and Bob has used the right term when he says McCarthyism. Now everybody that didn't serve in the military has to defend why they didn't serve. Just as 20, 30 years ago, anybody that belonged to any liberal organization had to explain why they weren't a communist. That burden of proof is on me and people like me, and it shouldn't be.
Do you think Neville Chamberlain is the ultimate pejorative in American public debate? To accuse someone of being a Neville Chamberlain toward the United States, which is what Newt Gingrich accuses Walter Mondale of being. Do you think Walter Mondale is a Neville Chamberlain?
Do you believe...
I don't. And I don't think he's got the right to say it.
Do you believe that Tom Downey, who has a student deferment and was attacked by Congressman Dornan to start this whole cycle of vile rhetoric, do you think that Tom Downey has the right to call the freedom fighters in Nicaragua thieves and thugs? Do you?
Do I think he has?
Yeah.
I guess he does.
You're damn right he does. And Mr. Gingrich has a right, too. The idea that there's some First Amendment limitations is ridiculous.
Let me get the congressman into this. It seems to me, sir, that where you people are wrong, you and Trent Lott and John Lehman and Pat Buchanan and Bob Dornan, where you are wrong is not that you don't have the right to say, look, I'm in favor of a higher defense budget. Not at all. You do. But where you are wrong is in suggesting that people who oppose a higher defense budget or who are critical of the military are somehow soft and weak-kneed and lily-livered and yellow. And that's what some of you are doing.
No, that's just not true. Cite me an example.
Oh, I'll give you Gingrich.
Yellow, lily-livered.
I'll give you Gingrich.
Gingrich challenges people on their policies, and that's, by the way, the criticism of Neville Chamberlain. Nobody says that Neville Chamberlain was an evil man, but his policies led to absolute disaster. And if we cannot intelligently criticize policies which we believe today might be leading to disaster, that's a dangerous situation.
All right, Mr. Dornan, I'll give you Mr. Dornan. He points to the congressmen who are opposing a military buildup of some kind, and he says, you are all up here with your mouths dripping spleen and bile.
That's
true. He had to apologize.
That's true.
That's what he said.
But that's true. That's exactly
What's
correct.
true about it?
I mean,
Why can't you take the argument that a man makes on the merits of the argument?
Can I try to put this thing in perspective for somebody who perhaps does not read the press as thoroughly as the junkies in Washington do? This all started with a reporter for the Wall Street Journal named Jane Mayer back in February when she did an absolutely outrageous piece for the Journal where she took Richard Burt, Assistant Secretary of State, Richard Perle, Assistant Secretary of Defense, people who did not serve in the military, and wrote an innuendo saying that they did not have a right to criticize, to take a hawkish position on military. Now, from there, from the derivative business that you're in, all your buddies, all your running dogs of tough guy liberalism, Mike Royko of the Chicago Tribune, Mike Barnicle of the Boston Globe, took the same names and started trashing Vin Weber, Newt Gingrich, and all these
men. And Royko specifically trashed us for voting in favor of the military. He never talked about these quotations about other members of Congress. He specifically talked about members that vote for higher defense budgets and didn't serve in the military. He linked the two directly in his column.
All right, well, let me ask you this. Here's Dornan. Dornan used this phrase, quote, jelly-kneed, draft-dodging women.
Wrong, that's bad. That's bad. He shouldn't say that. But that's the same thing that...
Well, it turns out that he never served in combat.
So you should have served Dornan and not... You should have taken on Dornan and not Gingrich.
Gingrich says anybody who voted for the amendment offered by Lee Hamilton and Michael Barnes could wear an I despise America button. That is not the merit. You say you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have said that. Now, the idea that Neville Chamberlain is anything but a pejorative, and he is, he's the ultimate pejorative. The irony is that so many of these people pattern themselves, or like to pattern themselves, after Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill never once criticized Neville Chamberlain on that basis alone. He was applauded at the time, if you recall, for his efforts to secure world peace. That aside, the key here...
He criticized, I was just rereading his first volume, Gathering Storm.
You want to read it?
He criticized...
I'll be happy to. I'll sit and nib it with you after the show. The key here is, what we have is, you talk about tough guys, and there's a tough guy rhetoric and mentality that permeates this administration. And this is what it comes down to. What we're going to do is get very, very tough. We're going to double the defense budget. And I'll tell you what we're going to ask you to do, America. We're going to double the defense budget. We're going to ask you to pay for it by cutting taxes by 1/3. Right, says all the patriots on the right. We'll cut taxes by 1/3.
What is the issue?
It's outless, painless patriotism. As long as kids from Youngstown, Ohio have to serve, and nobody from Bethesda, Maryland does, and nobody from Beverly Hills, and not a single son in the Reagan cabinet served. Let's go right through that group. If you want to do it, Bob, on the basis of a two-tier, you served in the military of the United States. Nobody in this debate right now served in the military of the United States.
No, I'm glad you said that, because...
Is that what you want?
The demagoguery... Is that what you want? Just a minute. The demagoguery...
Is that the kind of country you want,
The
Bob?
demagoguery of you and your ilk of putting out these names of these people...
I put out one name in my column, Bob. You want to say one name?
All right, let me give you... Let me tell you what Gingrich said. Gingrich said Vietnam was the right battlefield at the right time.
That's right.
Wait a minute. Just a minute. Gingrich got out of the draft by studying here and then there and then elsewhere.
That was perfectly legal, it was perfectly decent, and millions of other Americans did it. He was a young man, and he has said he doesn't know whether he made the right decision.
He told me I made a decision that the balance of survival for free societies is the quality of their civilian leadership.
You deny that?
No, but obviously...
That's true.
What obviously is being made here...
Is that not true?
That is true, and the ultimate fact that Jack Kennedy shouldn't have gone to World War II. Jack Kennedy shouldn't have served. He should have said, look, I want to be president of the United States. I'm not going to risk getting shot.
But Gingrich is right when he says that civilian leadership makes the decisions on how many of those lives are lost in Vietnam or anywhere else. You know, if we followed this mentality in the 1930s, you would have said Roosevelt should have resigned before we got into World War II. He never served in the military.
Hey, listen.
He claimed to have had polio.
Part of the question, I had to ask myself what difference I would have made. What difference I would have made. Now, is that the question you got to ask? I mean, and what difference it would have made to me, is what he added.
Mark, you're doing a tap dance on Congressman Gingrich.
I'm trying. He's the only one I wrote about. He's the only one I talked to. I didn't talk to Vin Weber about this.
That your buddies attacked Vin Weber. They attacked anybody who had a Barnicle. Let me just tell you this. I just looked through the congressional record today, congressional directory today. Just let me tell you a couple of things. Sure. Looking over Hawks only, Senator Sims was 3 years in the Marines. Representative Hyde was 3 years in the Navy. Senator Jesse Helms, your friend, was 3 years in the Navy. Senator John East was 3 years in the Marine Corps. Senator Strom Thurmond had 5 combat ribbons, 5 battle stars, 18 decorations, the Purple Heart, Senator John Tower in the Navy, Phil Crane in the Army, Senator Wallop, 3 years in the
Okay, well,
service.
that's enough of a
Phil,
list.
wait a minute,
Let me give you a list.
Just a minute.
Let me give you a list.
Let me finish.
Richard Burt, one of the biggest hawks we have. Richard Perle, one of the biggest hawks in the Defense
Wait a minute,
Department.
Tom.
No, I'm not going to win.
Let me finish.
Richard Perle is one of the biggest hawks in the Defense
went over-
Department, and what he said was there was no sense of urgency. I didn't think they needed me.
Let me just explain to you, if you can stop that fan-headed screaming for a minute. Senator Philip Crane, Senator Goldwater was a World War II pilot. Now, what have we got here now is not a question that the liberals fight, George McGovern fights, and the conservatives don't. What we have is a generational thing. We had a bad system in the Vietnam War.
You better believe it.
You
better believe it, Buck. Do you want to change it? Does Ronald Reagan and the right wing want to change it?
Ronald Reagan and the right wing got rid of the draft.
Is that what you want?
It was the selective service system that offered the educational deferments and the lottery and all those things. And that was the invention of the liberals that ran the government in the 1960s.
Gentlemen, Congressman, I'm sorry. I demand, on a point of order, please shut up. We've got to take a break for a commercial. We're talking about a new kind of argument here on Capitol Hill. That is to say, who is a war wimp? We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Crossfire. We're talking about the effort of certain liberals to muzzle anybody from foreign policy statements if they didn't serve in the armed services. We're talking to Congressman Vin Weber, Republican of Minnesota, and the eminent commentator and columnist Mark Shields, who has a new book, a very highly reviewed and well-reviewed book on the campaign trail. In that book, Mr. Shields says that now shattered is the national consensus on defense, and he talks about painless new patriotism. This is the new line. Frankly, isn't what you're doing to try to, when you trash Gingrich, when you trash Weber, isn't this all an attack on the Reagan defense policy?
No. No, I think that if one talks about the struggle we're involved in with the Soviets in this world, and it's a real struggle, then the real test is one of will. And I hardly think that any administration which offers as its panacea and placebo the doubling the defense budget and paying for it by cutting taxes by a third and putting the entire burden for defending the country upon the backs of the unemployed children of Youngstown, Ohio, on the Mesabi Range of Minnesota. They aren't asking the children of Bethesda, Maryland, or the children of Beverly Hills to serve. Then I'd say there's no test of will, and there's no example of will there. And it's an ouchless, painless patriotism.
Mr. Shields, you're as effective, you're more effective now that you're a journalist than you were when you were a Democratic campaign consultant.
Thank you.
And I don't want to debate with you. Maybe sometime we'll debate those questions. I'd like to. But I wanted to discuss this injection of poison into the political system by Congressman Andy Jacobs, Democrat of Indiana, who got on the House floor and said one of the most outrageous...
Steve Sims, a former Marine.
He was a former Marine, great record. And I really dislike this whole business of going to everybody's service credentials. He defined a war wimp as one all too willing to send others to war, but never gets around to going to war himself. I think that is McCarthyism. I don't care what Andy Jacobs' record is. The idea that somebody says that if you did not serve in a war yourself, you did not go in the military service, you cannot discuss it.
It's worse than that. It's not just that you can't discuss it. You can't discuss it on the conservative side. Nobody criticizes the veterans in Congress that are left-wingers and oppose the defense budget and oppose the administration's policy in Central America. It's only conservatives. It's only the chill one side.
I have not criticized you. I've not criticized anybody. Not serving. What I suggested was that Newt Gingrich, Republican congressman from Georgia, has raised this issue of Neville Chamberlain of I Despise America, charging his opponents on the other side of the debate who vote against him of despising the United States of America.
Look,
now you talk about McCarthyism.
You pulled out.
Give him a chance. I despise America. That is absolute baloney.
You pulled out a couple of outrageous comments, but if you listen to Gingrich, who talks hours on length, he makes a very important point. He makes a point that he's not challenging anybody's patriotism. He's not challenging their motives, but he's challenging their policies and what those policies might lead to.
Let me ask Mr. Weber. Let me ask Mr. Weber this question. I have heard and read Mr. Gingrich and others of your little group using these phrases: weak-willed, spineless, unwilling to face up to the communists, against a strong America. and even to the question of being softy. Now, when those fellas... Now, wait a minute.
Because this is a very sad...
By somebody who, it turns out, when you look up the record, went to divinity school.
What difference does that make?
Instead of serving in
You're
Vietnam.
talking about specific policies in regard to communism and Central
But they
America,
have...
national defense, response to terrorism. Those are all...
Look, a guy either stands up for his country or he doesn't stand up for his country, and the best way to tell whether he stands up for his country is not on whether he votes, but where he served when the chance to serve
Is
came.
that true of Franklin Roosevelt, who never served, of Woodrow Wilson, who never served, of 58? Well, so what? Now we're going to start making a
Wait a minute.
So we're going to judge everybody based on whether or not they have a good excuse or a bad excuse, and who's going to decide? Mark Shields? Mark Shields is going to decide who's got a good excuse or a bad one?
I'll tell you one thing, Ben. If I'm going to stand up there and say, you're soft on communism, Ben Weber, you don't care about this country, well, put your I despise America button on, then you've got a perfect right to say, okay, Shields, what do you think about this country? The fact of the matter is, and Tom Braden is absolutely right, that's what this debate has become, and it's become one of softy and pejorative. And once that has happened, then you're going to open up the record. You're going to open up the charge. It's the same thing on liberals on busing a generation ago. Liberals who are for busing and those who are against said that the people who are on the other side of the busing issue were racist. All right, when it was revealed that some liberals had their children in private schools where they weren't bused, all of a sudden hypocrisy entered the issue. When I stand up there as Paul Revere, as Machine Gun, as Commando Kelly, as Audie Murphy, and say, where the hell you're a despised America button, now you got a right to ask where I was.
Where is your column about Speaker O'Neill, who says that he looks at Reagan and he says Reagan won't be happy until he has men dying in Central America? Where's your column saying that he's drawing conclusions about our president's motivation and our president's character? How come you don't take on the left for their characterizations of the right? It's only the right and their characterizations of the left.
I'll tell you what the answer is. That the Democrats and the people who run with Mark Shields are in a terrible position where they are voting on the House of Representatives for the enemies of this country, and this is an absolute red herring to go into the service records of their opponents. I believe that unless you can say that Tom Downey has no right to criticize the Contras, to criticize the freedom fighters in Nicaragua because he had a student deferment, then unless you say that, if he didn't choose to fight for his country, then he can't criticize anything. That's nonsense. You can't make the criticism.
No, but it's worth the point that he didn't choose to fight for his country.
But then he can be a dog.
I'm 100% with Bob Dole. Now, there's a guy who fought in the 10th Mountain Division in Italy and who is by no means one of these wild-eyed belligerents stand up to the communists. He's a sensible, rational man.
I'll tell you what's sick about this whole thing. They had some guy in the Baltimore Sun who wrote another one of these derivative columns. All you guys read each other and lift from each other. And he writes one of these, I sure don't. And he writes one of these columns and it says, Mr. Browning was a member of the 86th Airborne Division. What the hell does that have to do with anything about his ability to comment on affairs?
Your list of war heroes that you went through, you got a lot of people who didn't serve in Vietnam. All right, you want to get through Vietnam?
This generation.
You want to get John Kerry? I know how highly you feel about John Kerry, and I'm sure you want to add John Kerry, Senator from Massachusetts, Purple Heart, Silver Star. Let's talk about Jack Murtha. Jack Murtha, assistant whip of the Democrats in the House.
You don't know the point. You don't understand the point I'm making.
Kids.
You don't understand the point I'm making.
Bob,
the point is this whole discussion doesn't make any sense. The point is we are becoming unable.
All right, gentlemen, I'm sorry. It's over.
I want to know where it started, and I want to know when people started quitting.
You'll have to continue it another day.
We're through. I know. It began in the
Well, thank you very much.
evening hours.
Mr. Novak and I'll be back in just a minute. I agree with you, Mr. Novak, that a fellow has to be judged on the merits of his criticism and not on his war record. But I think it's a good thing to point out that some of the most bellicose congressmen and columnists, from George Will to Pat Buchanan and all the rest of them, they are being bellicose after the war is over, and a lot of people who fought the war gave them the privilege to be bellicose.
Let me tell you something, Mr. Braden, that you and Mr. Shields and Mike Royko and Mike Barnicle are going down a very dark alley of trashing the First Amendment. When you're saying that they have to show that they have an honorable discharge, that they can wave around in order to say anything about public policy, that is a ridiculous... I don't believe you believe that. I think you're just saying that.
No, it is exactly the same as Richard Nixon saying, I was out there when the bombs were falling. Notice the when he was running against George McGovern, who was a decorated bomber pilot. From the left, I'm Tom Braden.